the ocean is black. Only the faint flicker of phosphorescence glows where the propellers cut through the deep. The sea is calm, but beneath it, death is waiting. They once called them the wolves of the Atlantic, the silent hunters who struck without warning, sinking ships before vanishing beneath the waves. For a time, the U-boat ruled the ocean. Allied convoys feared the night. Sailors prayed through the fog, but that supremacy would not last. Because one night, the hunters became the hunted. This is the story of the moment German U-boat crews realized they were being hunted, and the ocean that once obeyed them turned against them. The rise of the wolves, 1939 to 1941, in the early years of the Second World War. The ocean belonged to Germany. When the first U-boats set out from the ports of Kiel, Wilhelmshaven, and Lorient, they carried with them a new kind of warfare, silent, patient, and merciless. By 1940, the Atlantic had become a graveyard of steel and oil. Convoy after convoy was torn apart. British merchant ships went down in flames. Lifeboats drifted among burning oil slicks. The men aboard those subs, young, fearless, and indoctrinated, believed they were invincible. U-boat commanders like Gunther, who led U-47 into Scapa Flow to sink the battleship Royal Oak, became national heroes. Their faces appeared on propaganda posters. The German press called them the new knights of the sea. Inside the cramped hulls, men worked shoulder to shoulder in air thick with diesel and sweat. Every valve hissed, every rivet vibrated. The red lights bathed their faces in an eerie glow as they listened to the creak of the ocean pressing against the hull. They were isolated from the world beneath the surface, beneath the noise, beneath time itself. And for a moment, it seemed as if Germany had won the war beneath the waves. They never expected that the ocean, which had protected them, would soon become their tomb. The turning tide, 1942. By 1942, the war had spread across continents, but for the U-boat men, the battlefield was the same, the endless Atlantic. Yet something had changed. In London, codebreakers at Bletchley Park had begun to unravel the secrets of the Enigma machine. What the U-boat captains thought was unbreakable. The encrypted signals that guided their hunts were now being quietly intercepted. When U-boats gathered in their wolf, believing themselves coordinated and unseen, Allied convoys already knew their routes. The hunters sailed unknowingly into traps. Still, the U-boat fleet pressed on. Admiral Karl Dönitz, the architect of Germany's submarine war, remained convinced that the U-boat could strangle Britain into surrender. In January 1942, he launched Operation Paukenschlag, the drumbeat campaign, sending U-boats to the American coast. It was a slaughter. The cities along the eastern seaboard glowed like lanterns, silhouetting merchant ships against the horizon. U-boats picked them off one by one. Survivors spoke of torpedoes cutting the night, of explosions lighting the sea like lightning. But even as German sailors celebrated, the ocean began to whisper, and the whisper said, "They're watching you now." Allied scientists and engineers were crafting a new kind of weapon, one that could see in the dark depths, where no eye could. Sonar, radar, high-frequency, direction finding. The silent war was about to change forever. The Silent Eye, 1943. By the spring of 1943, the tide had fully turned. What began as subtle shifts, a few missing U-convoys suddenly changing course, became a storm of destruction. The Allies had unleashed a weapon the Germans could not see, nor hear, complete intelligence awareness. Every U-boat transmission became a signal of its own doom. In the cold night waters of the North Atlantic, U-boat crews began to feel it. The unease, the sonar pings that echoed faintly through the hull, the distant rumble of aircraft engines far above the cloud, the sudden bloom of light when a depth charge detonated nearby. They had once been the ghosts of the ocean. Now, they were the ones being haunted. New Allied escort carriers and long-range patrol bombers, Liberators, Sunderlands, convoys that once scattered in fear now steamed forward with confidence. And when a U-boat surfaced to recharge its batteries, it often met a waiting hunter in the sky. U-boat losses mounted catastrophic. In May 1943 alone, 43 U-boats were destroyed, nearly one every day. The month became known among submariners as Black May. Inside each boat, the air grew stale and silent. Men whispered prayers they'd never learned. Each creak of metal felt like a warning. They no longer wondered if they'd be found. But when in the silence that followed each attack, one truth became clear. They were not the hunters anymore. Life below the WAVS to understand what it meant to be hunted. You have to descend into the U-boat itself, a metal coffin 200 feet long, carrying 50 men in air that stank of oil and fear. The walls dripped with condensation. Every sound was amplified, the steady ticking of gauges, the soft rumble of the electric motors, the pounding of hearts. When the sonar pings began, sharp, metallic, and terrifying, they echoed like the heartbeat of death itself. Men froze. They knew what came next. Depth charges. At first, just distant thuds, then closer, louder. The hull groaned and flexed under the pressure. Paint flaked from the walls. Bolts screamed. Light bulbs shattered. There was no sky, no sun, no escape. Only the crushing weight of the ocean, and the knowledge that somewhere above, an enemy ship waited patiently, listening. Food spoiled. Water was rationed. Air grew foul. The men lived surrounded by silence, the kind of silence that presses against your chest until you can't tell if your heart is still beating. When they realized they were being hunted, it wasn't just by ships or aircraft, it was by the sea itself. The very element that had once sheltered them was now their executioner. The trap sea. Allies had turned the ocean into a network of invisible traps. ASDIC sonar, lee lights, radar-equipped aircraft, and escort carriers worked in deadly harmony. Each time a U-boat surfaced to send a message or recharge batteries, it exposed itself for a few precious minutes, and that was all the time needed. In June 1943, U-200 was detected by a South African B-24 Liberator. The aircraft's radar locked on to a faint return. Within minutes, depth charges tore through the surface. The U-boat never resurfaced. One by one, the veterans of the early war disappeared. U-99, U-100, U-333, U-2659. The names blurred into casualty reports. The wolf packs that once dominated the Atlantic had become scattered wrecks on the ocean floor. Still, new crews were trained, new boats launched. Many were barely out of their teens, boys sent to fight a war that had already turned against them. The ocean no longer felt like a hunting ground. It felt like a graveyard waiting to be filled. And in those final patrols, a strange stillness settled over the crews. The laughter of the early days was gone. The bravado faded. What remained was duty and resignation. When they realized the Atlantic was no longer theirs, it was not with anger, but with silence. The fall of the U-boat empire, 1944 to 1945. By 1944, Germany's submarine arm was collapsing. Out of the 1,162 U-boats built, more than 750 were lost. Over 30,000 submariners never returned. The average life expectancy of a U-boat sailor had fallen to just 2 patrols. Even as new, advanced models like the Type 21 were designed faster, quieter, deadlier, it was too late. The Allies ruled the sea and the sky. The once mighty U-boat pens of France, Rayon, Saint-Nazaire, La Rochelle echoed with emptiness. Concrete fortresses that had been symbols of power became monuments to futility. In the final months, U-boat commanders received orders that bordered on hopelessness. Some were told to attack Allied fleets off Normandy during the DA invasion, missions that ended in annihilation. Others were ordered to the Arctic, to intercept convoys bound from Rome. Few came back as the Reich collapsed on land. The last U-boats still roamed the sea, unaware that Berlin was burning. They transmitted coded messages into the void, not knowing no one was listening anymore. When the war ended in May 1945, many U-boats were still at sea. Upon receiving the surrender order, their captains surfaced white flags replacing the black insignia of the wolf. Some scuttled their boats rather than surrender. Others sailed into Allied ports under the gaze of their former enemies. For the men who survived, there was no celebration, only relief. They had endured what few humans could, the sound of their own deaths approaching, echoing through steel. The ocean keeps its SEC. 10 decades later, the ocean still holds the remains of that silent war. Hundreds of U-boats lie scattered across the seabed, rusting hulls, collapsed towers, shattered periscopes. They rest in silence, surrounded by silt and darkness. Inside, the relics of vanished lives remain. A rusted coffee mug, a torn uniform, a logbook sealed shut by salt. For historians, these wrecks are time capsules. For those who served, they are tombs. Many U-boat men never knew what hit them. A single ping, a single depth charge, and then nothing. Just darkness. The ocean absorbed their cries, their courage, their fear, and yet, their story endures because beneath the myth of the hunter lies the truth of the hunted. In the end, the U-boat war was not just a battle for the Atlantic. It was a battle for survival against inevitability. They were young men, bound by duty, swallowed by the sea. They believed they were predators, but the ocean reminded them that no man commands the deep forever. When they realized they were being hunted, it was already too late. The silence that followed was not defeat, it was remembrance. The ocean keeps their names, their echoes, their final breaths. And when the tide rolls in over the wrecks of the fallen, it whispers their story again, a reminder that even the most powerful hunters eventually vanish into history. And somewhere, deep beneath the waves, the last ping fades, like a memory sinking into the dark.